Hi, I'm Dave Sobel, host of the Business of Tech podcast. On today's What I Tell Investors, we're going to talk about the managed services provider market. Now, I'm assuming you don't have a ton of experience with this market, so this video is designed to give you an overview. We're going to cover the problem that it solves, what the history of the space is, what a typical provider looks like, the magic of the market, how MSPs grow, what cohorts mean, the difference between sell-to products and sell-through products, and what is the chain of delivery. So let's dive in. So first, let's talk about the core problem that managed services providers solve. If you're in small business, you have technology needs, and ultimately, you need them to be serviced by somebody that understands technology. I tell anybody that's interested in understanding this space that for the next 2 weeks, every time you deal with someone who has a small business, a lawyer, a doctor, a local retailer, whoever that is, ask them how they solve their computer problems, who runs their network, who manages their data, and who backs that all up. You'll find varying degrees of providers that solve that problem. They vary in size all the way from a one-man organization up to very large organizations that work with enterprise companies. The magic here is that generally, like-size company likes to deal with like-size company. Small companies like to work with small companies, medium-sized companies like to work with medium-sized companies, and big companies generally work with other big companies. Ultimately, it's actually kind of hard to straddle those two. If you're a big company, it's kind of hard for you to deal with small companies. Small companies, really difficult for you to win contracts with those big companies. There's bridges, of course, and there's exceptions, but as a general rule, like sizes generally like to work with each other. Now, where this comes in is when you're in the technology space and you have solutions that you want to sell to small businesses, you got that struggle. Maybe you're a B2C type company and you're trying to sell to consumers. You'll figure out some automated way to do that. But typically in the business world, you're trying to develop more of a relationship. This is somebody that you want to work with on an ongoing basis and you're looking for advice. Thus, the problem. Let's take a quick step back and talk about the history of selling technology in this space. When we go back to the early days of computing, like the rollout of the original PCs, you would go to a local retailer, and if you were in business, you'd buy that equipment. That local retailer actually you would go to that local retailer and you would buy equipment. And you know what? That local retailer actually made money on the transaction. When this all started up, you could make money on hardware. You could make a lot of money. But over time, when that became commoditized, it became more and more difficult for you to get money out of that transaction. And the idea of moving from a reseller to a value-added reseller came around. What this means is that you would add value to the transaction. I'd help you with other things that I was going to sell with it. Printers, add-ons, monitors, software. I would do all of the things around it. But additionally, over time, those two started having trouble getting margins. So we moved into more services. And those value-added became services. I'll help you install it. I'll help you make sure you understand how to use it. I'll do training. And it was very transactional. Now, as the internet came around and as the ability for us to connect to these devices remotely became a thing, you actually became in a position where you could do a lot of that work remotely. And that opened up the idea of working with organizations through remote means to be able to do that on an ongoing basis. And ultimately, the idea of managed services came around, where what we would do is we would sell you a series of services that kept your network running and would keep you running on an ongoing basis. We would be more proactive using those technologies, be able to reach in, run your organization, and prevent problems when they came up. That is the direction that we've gone now, and now we're transforming to deliver those same services via cloud services rather than having to install servers. So let's talk a little bit about the typical provider. 93% of these companies do less than $5 million in revenue. The vast majority of them look sort of in that $1 to $2 million of annual revenue. The bulk of what they do is made up in those services, and the bulk of their cost is in the engineers and people that they need to keep that running. In fact, that's the number one expense line item. Software actually is a much lower portion of that. That's important for anybody who's investing in this space to understand. It is a services business much more than a tools business. If you're investing in those vendors that supply software, you need to understand that for the typical provider, those tool costs are much smaller. They're going to be, just a few percentage points of revenue when compared to the other portions of a typical provider's business. On average, not best in class, but average, these tend to be businesses that are running about 14% profit to the bottom line. Now, it's a tough business. About a quarter of the space pre-pandemic was running break even or at a loss. Oftentimes that happens the less mature they are, not necessarily related to size, but based on maturity, how good they are at executing a business model. So what's the magic of this market? Well, the magic of this market is the fact that because like-sized companies work with other like-sized companies, if you're a big software company, your best way to get into the small business customers you'd like to work with is through this avenue. It's often referred to as the channel, or a distribution channel, or a multi-tiered channel. But the idea here is this: through this reseller channel, you, the larger software company, can get into these other organizations. Or if you're a small software company, you can create an aggregated sales force. That's the trick to that's going on here. So by engaging with these managed services providers, these IT services providers, you get access to their customers. So in theory, for every single one you sign on, you're getting all of their customers. A typical provider will have anywhere between a handful of customers and several hundreds. On average, I tend to average it out to be about 40 or 50, maybe 60 customers per in that typical provider. But you can see by acquiring every single one, you'll then theoretically get access to their entire customer base, and it grows really quickly. So let's talk about cohorts, because the idea here is if you're in this model of recurring revenue, because these providers are selling their services on a monthly recurring basis, and if you too can sell your vendor services in on a monthly recurring basis, you can start building cohorts over time. And the longer you keep them on, the more the lifetime value of those MSPs and their customers rolls into your portfolio. So the idea here is that if you just keep acquiring over time, you will expand each one. But here's the magic. Each provider is also growing. So every time they acquire a new customer, you too can also acquire a new customer. And it goes one level deeper. Because if you think about each of the end customers that they are serving, they too are adding new customers. So you get this multi-level approach. The managed services provider themselves gets the advantage of the growth of their customers. They're serving 40 customers. Each one adds a new employee each year. That's 40 new users they get to bill for just on their own. Oftentimes when they're selling in, if they'll do 1, 2, 3, 4 deals a year, even in a small provider, they're still bringing on 4 customers that'll then each also grow. And if they keep their customers over time, they see this advantage. But the software vendors that are moving in here see an additional advantage because they get it another level by serving the managed services providers who are serving the customers. All of that expansion flows up. So the magic is by layering this in and keeping them and stacking over time, each one grows and creates a really great growth curve. Your trick, keeping them on the ranch. Now, how do MSPs grow themselves? Well, they go out and they sell their services. Most of them are going to be using traditional B2B style engagement. And oftentimes, this sector is actually not known for its sales and marketing skills. 9 times out of 10, if you talk to a provider, they're doing it the old school way. Referrals and basic business networking. Not a lot of digital acquisition, not a lot of truly automated onboarding. It's an area of opportunity for both sides, but that's the way the market is working right now. They also, as they accelerate and get better at that, they'll enhance their sales skills, and additionally, some will start moving into M&A so that they will start acquiring other organizations to accelerate that growth. Their risk of doing that is they have to make sure that they're partnered and bringing in with another provider that matches their culture and their technological ability. It is an awful lot of work when one customer base is one running very well and one is much more disorganized, bringing those two together. But they grow through that type of engagement. So I want to take a moment and talk about the different kinds of software products that are available in this space. The reason is because there's actually a bit of a difference. The big question anytime I talk to an investor who's looking at a software company is to understand what that software does in the context of this space, and it falls into one of 2 categories. The first is the idea of sell-to products, and the other is the idea of sell-through products. Now, what do I mean? In the first category, a sell-to product is a product that the MSP or provider will use themselves in their business for operations or efficiency reasons. So it's a back-end piece of software, something that makes them more efficient or helps them save some money, makes that labor a little bit more efficient or a little less costly, something they're using. This can be like a trouble ticketing system, an invoicing system, it can be an HR system, it can be any of the technologies that the providers use themselves. Or the other addendum to that is one where they're going to absorb the cost simply because they're looking at using it as a tool to reduce their own labor. For me, these are all the ones that are sell-to. Now, why do you care about this? When I explain the difference with sell-through, it'll make some sense. So sell-through. The idea of a sell-through product is one where it actually gets all the way out to the end customer. The MSP can embed that into their services or sell it directly. So that means that they're able to reach out and sell it to their customers. This is the critical difference because in the sell-to environment, I only get the benefit of selling to the MSP and all of the users there. But in a sell-through product line, I get not only the MSP using it, but I also get all of their customers and all of those end devices. And thus, I fully unlock all of the value that happens through the model that I talked about from the cohorts. I get the multiple levels there. So for example, if I sell an MSP a ticketing system, I only get the advantage of that MSP using it themselves and their engineers and however they grow. But if I'm selling a piece of technology that works on, say, every endpoint that they're using, I get all of those endpoints as part of my billing, and I get the subsequent growth of all of their customer bases. This is why understanding the difference between a sell-to product and a sell-through product makes such an important difference. So let's talk a little bit about the chain and what I mean by this. Now, if I've talked about the idea of channels, and you get the idea that a large software vendor or a software vendor wants to go out to this model, they're going to use a distribution chain of some kind. What they're going to do here is either in an old model, particularly if you think about this from a traditional hardware sales perspective, the manufacturer will create something, they will use a distributor to sell that. The solution provider, service provider, MSP will consume it from the distributor and get it out to the end user. That is the traditional chain of distribution that happens. Of course, now in software, we can disrupt that some. If we are a software provider, we don't necessarily need a distributor in order to do that. We can sell directly to the service provider and they can go out to their end customer. Of course, there is also the idea that a software manufacturer can go directly to the end user and potentially bypass that. It'll cause some friction. There's a bunch of stuff to learn about doing that, but it is a model that we do see. It's not necessarily the one that the MSPs like because they're bypassed. Now, what gets more confusing is in today's buying world, you don't have to do this. You can actually have influencers, you can have those that are making recommendations who are only making money on the services around that, or the consulting services, and still maintain that. It has become less of this linear chain. However, you need to understand the various models that I've laid out here in order to understand how you go to market. So this has been just a quick overview of the market. The idea just to give you a sense of what's going on here. I get a lot of calls from investors or those trying to understand the managed services market, and this gives that quick overview of the various components. If you're interested in more, go ahead and ask questions there in the comments. I'm always happy to answer anything that you might be interested in, but this gives you some of the high-level basics to understand the market. Thanks for listening. If you like it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I do a ton of material covering the IT services market, and I deliver a daily podcast called The Business of Tech, which is all the news about technology through the lens of those IT service providers. So if you're interested in learning more, you can listen to the issues that matter to them and go from there. There's videos here on the YouTube channel giving you insights into the kind of issues that they are providing and what they're thinking about in terms of the way they deliver their services. If you need more information, go ahead and visit mspradio.com. You can reach out and get in touch with me, and I'm always happy to answer more questions. Thanks for listening.